Hello, my name is Julian. I'm one of the developers over at Blue Triangle, and I'm the lead developer on CSP Community Edition. Today, I'm making a video for developers to give them a quick code rundown in the structure of the code for CSP. First, I want to do a quick review of the flow of the code. So the first thing that happens is the user requests the page. As the page is requested, headers are loaded. Inside these headers is our CSP. This CSP is strict and non-blocking, so it'll generate a lot of errors. These errors are collected inside the security policy violation event handler, so we'll create an event listener to collect those errors. Those errors are stored inside a variable called BTT CSP free error. After a delay of 5 seconds, this error data is sent via AJAX to the WordPress backend. The next thing that we do is we parse these errors on the backend, and new errors are added to the database. So the first file is the main file of this plugin. We'll go ahead and open it up. It has the typical WordPress header with the plugin name, and then we'll include a couple of files here. One's called the view functions, and one's called Ajax inside a controllers folder. This is to give it more of an MVC feel, even though it's more procedural code than anything else. The next thing we have is the activation hook, and this hook happens when you install the plugin. When you install the plugin, it'll create a few structures here. The first one is the directive structure, which lists out each directive for a CSP. It gives you a little definition for each directive and what type of file it tends to block and what type of directive it is. For instance, fetch for image source and frame source. So we'll continue to scroll down. And right here is where we define the site option for this object. This one is called, we put a prefix in front of all of our options, which is Blue Triangle Automated CSP Free. And then this option is called Directives, just for a little bit of consistency. The next thing is directive options. So each of these directives, you can have different sources for each of these directives. So, for instance, host source can have HTTP or HTTPS. And again, it gives you a little bit of a description of what these do. These descriptions and definitions come straight off the W3C site, as well as Mozilla and Chrome sites. I made them match up as best as I could. So the same thing, this object goes set as a WordPress option inside the database, and this one is called directive options. Now this last one is where the CSP violations actually get stored for each directive that gets violated. So for each directive, we actually have a key. Again, this one's stored as free errors. This last one lets us know whether or not the user is in report only mode or if they want to put their CSP into blocking mode. And here is where we store our actual CSP. This next hook is where we define when the plugin gets deactivated. We want to remove each object that we saved in the beginning. The send headers hook is actually where the meat and potatoes are for our CSP. Right here, we grab the CSP from the database and we inject it into the response header. In the WP head hook, we collect the data from the CSP errors with a JavaScript. The first thing we do is define an nonce, create an admin URL with that nonce, and define our script that collects the CSP errors. First, we define a global variable for the admin URL. The next thing we do is we define a global variable to collect all our CSP errors. We add an event listener for a security policy violation. The event listener then pushes in information from the violation, like the domain, source file, referrer, document URI, violated directive, and the type of error, which is CSP. We then set a timeout for 5 seconds, and in 5 seconds, we then send via AJAX our CSP errors to the WordPress backend to be parsed and placed into the database via our objects that we listed above. This next function defines our menu items. We add our menu items with the admin menu hook. This last function actually builds our CSP. Every time you approve or disapprove a domain, this function runs and rebuilds the content security policy for your site. The majority of the code is located in the source folder, and then if you take a look at controllers, and let's start in AJAX. Here is where we define all our AJAX hooks for the admin menu. Also, the AJAX hook that collects the CSP errors. So this first AJAX hook defines whether the security policy is in blocking or non-blocking mode. This next hook, called freeApprove, disapproves or approves the domain depending on what the user chose inside the admin dashboard. This next hook, called directive options, sets the options for the directives inside the directive options page. This last hook is the main hook. It's called send CSP. Inside this main hook is where we actually parse out our content security violations and place them inside the WordPress database. The first thing we want to do is grab the incoming errors. We get both of our site options that we're going to update. Then for each of the errors, we start parsing. The first thing we want to do is figure out the type of error. In all cases, this should be CSP for now. The next thing we do is try to figure out the file extension for the error. For instance, if this was a JavaScript file, this should say JS. The next thing we're going to try to get is the domain. The domain is the main part of this error that we want to figure out, because this is how we allow this domain for this directive. We create a switch statement to try to figure out what kind of violation this is or what kind of domain it is. In the case of blob, we're going to actually look at the source file. In the case of inline, we also look at the source file. In the case of data, the domain is usually located in the document URI. The last case is a typical CSP violation where domain is actually the violation. Here we strip apart the domain to just get the root domain. The last thing we do is create a timestamp so we can timestamp when this violation happened. If this violation already exists inside the database, we don't add it again. The last thing we do is create an object with this violation data, and we store it inside our CSP errors object. The next thing is our view functions. These define our admin views. We enqueue several scripts like Bootstrap.js as well as toggle Bootstrap. Each view is stored inside the views folder. For instance, here's the dashboard view. As you can see, this is where the markup is stored for the site. I hope this helps. Thank you for watching.